Hello and welcome to a podcast about Silent Sky at KU. I'm your dramaturg, Jane Barnette, and I am here with both the director of the show, Michelle Miller, and our production manager and, fan of the show, Jenna Link.
Big fan.
And speaking of fandom, one of the first things I think would be fun for us to talk about, I would like to start with Jenna, actually, because when we first started considering this script, I just remember so vividly Jenna fangirling out about it in the meeting and talking about how it was like your favorite script. So could you tell us a little bit about how, like, first time you saw it or read it and why you love it so much?
Absolutely. My first exposure to Silent Sky was the summer of 2022, which was just before I started my appointment at KU. And I was stage managing the production at Summer Repertory Theater Festival in Northern California. And I fell in love. It became my favorite place to be when I was in Silent Sky rehearsals. I loved the voice that Lauren Gunderson put into this play. I loved the heart behind the story of these women who really were computers at Harvard and made such huge leaps in astronomy that they don't often get as much credit as they deserve for. Just the celebration and the exploration and the thoughtfulness in the words and how they're put together really appealed to me. And I fell in love with this play.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine, certainly I know from our production, but I imagine that at the production that you were stage managing, the set was also probably very, very cool. It feels like such an opportunity for design.
Yes. Yes, I had some great collaborators at Summer Rep, and Meg Alexander was our director, and I have a long-time relationship, a great collegial relationship with Anne, and we had a great design team.
Speaking of design, because I know that I've only seen glimpses, but what I've seen has blown me away already. Michelle, talk to us a little bit about what's happening design-wise with Silent Sky for y'all.
I've been a fan of Lauren Gunderson's work since I met her in New York City in 2010 through a friend and started reading her stuff intensely and finding that her voice was so interesting and had an interested take in history and women of history and bringing them to life in a way that wasn't didactic, even though it did teach people. It was entertaining and poetic without being haughty. It's so grounded, and there's an economy in the words that's very potent that I love in all of her works. And I personally love astronomy. I listen to podcasts with astronomers to go to sleep at night because it gives me a tremendous sense of calm to know that no matter what turmoil is happening down here, there is order somewhere in the universe. It doesn't make me feel tiny. It makes me feel part of a meaning making community on what could be the only planet that has meaning makers the way that we have it. So it feels really exciting to bring that to life and to do it through the design process, as well as working with you on dramaturgy and working with the actors. This has been probably, it's like choosing a favorite child, but there's so many aspects of this that has been just so engaging to me on multiple levels. And that has been working with the design team, who have all been collaborative and thoughtful and have really indulged my nerdiness on it in a way that, I love to hand things over to a design team to be like, these are my thoughts. These are the things that I would like to, from research and other aspects, to bring in. And I knew I wanted to have a large dome structure. I knew I wanted to incorporate a feeling of elliptical movement on the stage. So it's curves everywhere. And actually, the deck is being painted to look like an astrolabe, which is named for a 10th century Muslim Arab woman astronomer, for which we have the astrolabe, the name. So Miriam Astrolabi. And that it just creates this really vibrant production. So we had 12 meetings with just my set designer, where he and I would kind of just go into things and nerd out on it, and he gave me so many options, because you know this, Jane, as a director as well, that options is our playground. Ultimately, we want everybody that we're supporting to have agency in their roles. And Jordan Maloney is just, man, what a joy to work with. This amazing human is, and the set is grand, and it revolves and it evolves. It's really reflective of every aspect of the play, and that there is a grandeur and an economy to it. There's just nothing wasted in the space, and it flows very seamlessly. I wanted to really honor Lauren's movement and intentionality of her words. I wanted to honor it in every aspect, so that it isn't dead. Costumes have done a beautiful job with the textures, getting the historical accuracy on it, especially, she had a hearing issue. So we have a hearing aid that is, wow, that thing is cumbersome, that Dave in our scene shop put together. And it really gives, I think, the actor an appreciation for the toil of Henrietta, of what
Yeah.
she should go through. And then working with sound, projections, and lighting. We're doing weekly meetings. It's not where we just leave things to tech, to
Yeah.
really hone in that it's just not one person's vision. It's this collective striving for something greater, more beautiful, amplifying these women's voices, bringing to life a work that, we three in this moment are all so passionate about. It feels like I know it sounds silly, but like an honor to be doing it, especially at this time in history,
Oh,
So
I, I can vibe with that 100%. I think it's such an honor whenever we get to work with our students in particular, because they're so talented, but with a script that has this much energy behind it. And I just wanted to pick up on a little bit of what you were talking about with the hearing aid, because I think that's something that's so important about this play. On the one hand, we have an actual depiction of a disability on stage, but it isn't one that is sort of centered as a victim kind of creation tool, but rather at the very heart of the themes that are in the play and the title itself, right? Like the sort of choices when Henrietta makes choices to remove her hearing aid. I think that sort of decision that, I would credit Gunderson with that 100%, but just the fact that there are these moments where the disability itself is the power, right? Is the power to shut out the noise, is the power to focus on her own intelligence. I, I just think that's brilliant, because way too many times, right, we have disability as some kind of extra thing, as opposed to something that is going to shape and change a human being utterly.
yeah, I think it's a great vehicle for a couple of things. Exactly what you said about cutting out the noise. Even when she's in the scene with one of the characters who's being just infuriating, and she
Mm-hmm.
basically is like, I could just take this out and you can keep orienting, meaning just like, I can tune you out and just move on to the crux of things. And I think that, especially at a time when we are so buffeted, and I always use the phrase drinking from the fire hose of information, that there is something really essential about her ability to find quiet, and to find, in that quiet and intimacy of a noiseless zone, to go be so expansive with her vision. And I think that she displays things that someone who's also neurodiverse would have. There's a lot of aspects of this that I think, the human condition being one that is one of variety and a spectrum that can be played with, and that there is no such, that normal is an insidious word, especially when we're talking about the extraordinary, is really
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not going to pretend to know much about science, because anybody can check me like easily. But what I do understand is that there's something about the distance between the stars that is related somehow to music, and that Henrietta, the real Henrietta, studied music, or tried to start studying music maybe before the hearing loss occurred. And I find, again, and I don't mean to sort of like belabor the point, but I just wondered, Jenna, I know you love musicals. And this is not a musical. It's a play with music, but it's also a play where sound is part of the theme, whether we're talking about the absence or the presence of sound or the way that sound helps us measure things. And I wondered if you could just speak a little bit to, how sound works in this play, or what you've noticed when you've seen it or read it.
Sure. I think sound plays a tremendous role in this play, not only for the things that we've been talking about with the ability to remove sound and noise from her universe, but in the way that hearing in the play, her sister is the one who's playing, and we realize that she realizes that the distance between the stars is kind of in conversation with the tones on the piano, and that can sort of explain for us the distance from stars. And so that discovery happens within the play, and it's because of her sister's passion for music. She also played clarinet, which she has in common with Peter, who is the love interest for Henrietta in the play, and also someone who works at Harvard.
Yeah, I know it's hard. Like, we don't want to give away like parts of the play, and no, I don't think you did a spoiler. I really don't. But I also think we can't really talk fully about the play without acknowledging some of these things that may be considered spoilers by people who don't understand how cool the play is.
And I think our sound designer, Anna Rose North, has done a fantastic job of exploring her sound world, Henrietta's world of sound, and incorporating that into the ideas behind her sound design.
Yeah, Hannah showed up with the most complete proposal I have ever seen from a designer anywhere at any time. It honestly could be put forth as a really beautiful sonic tone poem for its own production that I think an observatory should actually bring on, because it was so thoughtful with her use of chromatics and scale, and incorporating the music that's licensed with the play by Jenny Gearing, who's a composer in New York City, keeping that voice, the original voice, to stay true to the show, but then also incorporating things that work right in tandem with Rhea Penny, our projection designer, with her work as well. So we have this really, this in tandem collaboration that's going on. And I really loved, Jenna, that you used the word dialogue. It is all about conversation, and dialogue is actually one of the terms for it, or one of the definitions, is about moving forward, about the back and forth that propels us forward. Or dialectic is more to that point. And that's really what this is. It is almost like a call and response between these individuals who are looking at the stars and forging ahead and searching for answers, and what they find in one another and in themselves on that quest.
Yeah. I mean, it's been so exciting to do research about these so-called human computers, right? These women who, I think Pickering called them a harem, right? This sort of harem of computer women types. And for Gunderson then to give voice to the life of some of them, at least, is so valuable. But of course, as someone who specializes in adaptation, I was really intrigued by the moments when Gunderson made decisions that went against the actual history. So, for example, as I understand it, Annie was also either deaf or hearing impaired in life, but not in this play. And that is an interesting choice that I would love to hear your thoughts on. But then there's also, I think, room for questions about Henrietta's I guess love life, we can say, or lack thereof. Or could we just use the word queer? Is it possible to read Henrietta, historic Henrietta, through a queer lens as opposed to a heteronormative one? And, what was an advantage potentially of creating this foil for Henrietta in the character of Peter that Lauren Gunderson imagines.
Yeah, I think Jen and I both have thoughts on that. As I'm a writer, and so I have that background, and so you start to look at what the dramatic devices are, and why we would take, Henrietta. Wasn't she was the oldest of seven, right? That I remember.
I think so.
Seven, and there was infant death in the family, and in the play she has one sister.
Mm-hmm.
So the forcing function there would be why she would have to go to her sister to help with a big family event. Because if there are other people there, you presume that other people could step in. So there's a way of that condensing into one character that becomes a dramatic forcing function. And the same with Peter, in that he steps in as this avatar for maleness. We're just going to say for whether it's the patriarchal structure, the societal norms of the time, the expectation. Pickering, who was an actual historical figure, but Peter is not. What that is. So we see the hierarchy. We see mediocre maleness and what that looks like against exceptional women. Also, what it is that we perceive from a heteronormative lens as what she gave up, because by pursuing her career, is the idea that there is one path. There is a queer lens by which this play is viewed, not for Henrietta, but others. And I think that what is so adroit in what Lauren does is that it's just seamlessly woven in, that so that it becomes just part of the framework of the show. There's nothing that feels like you're just being, except for the rampant sexism, which we know still continues within the field today. But everything else is just kind of part of the grist for the mill and the richness of the characters. So I think it gently brings people into that dialogue about the varying lenses. And I think if we had another deaf character, there is a potency that could go from her story, because it is Henrietta's story.
I think, Michelle, you said about kind of condensing characters made me want to mention that there are only 5 roles in the play. And, in a world where cast size get bigger and bigger, it's really interesting to have this huge, vast story told in such an intimate way. And to remove the noise of other humans like Pickering. Peter will come in and speak for Pickering a little bit, and there's reference to Pickering, and we do know Pickering was a real person. He's a answer on Jeopardy the other day, by the way, like you do. But I think it's interesting how in a way Lauren Gunderson's also removing the noise from the story by keeping it a cast of 5. I'm sure there were other computers in the harem, but we're really only focused on Annie Jump Cannon, Wilhelmina, and Henrietta, and they're parts of the pie here. Yeah.
And I feel like you're getting to something that I did want to bring up, which is that for the last several years running, Lauren Gunderson has been the most produced playwright, not the most produced female playwright, which don't get me started, but the most produced playwright. And, people want to know, what is it about her work that is so compelling? Why do people want to produce her work? And Michelle, you've spoken to this, and I think Jenna, in some ways, you're speaking to this as well. There's a way in which, she's able to take big ideas and make them compelling and small enough that they can be digested, so to speak, ?
Yeah, I think that she does, that reducing the complicated to the simple without it being overly simplified.
Right.
That she finds a way that reaches into the audience and brings them along without leaving them behind. Because there have been other great plays written about science, but they can get really heady in a way that loses the audience. And I think that she speaks across the spectrum as well to the people who want the interrelational pieces and aspects of it, but also to the people who are very interested in the science, who are very interested in it. Nobody feels talked down to in her work, whether it's in The Revolutionists, in I and You, She just wrote a play that premiered in Chicago, Billie Jean, and it's about Billie Jean King. So, she
Will,
definitely, yeah, Goodwill, great. And she's INU is a musical now, two-person music. I mean, the woman is prolific. Prolific. Her husband is a virologist who is one of the people who was helping create the COVID-19 vaccine, and she wrote about that journey.
oh,
I think that she is always not just seeking story, but letting story engage her, and she just says yes and rides it, because you can't have this amount that she does. And they tend to be pretty tidy plays. They're not huge, which makes them easy to produce at the regional level. They are accessible for, this Silent Sky is getting done in educational places. It just was done recently, I think in Seattle, at a professional production. It just provides such a rich opportunity for communities to engage with a smaller cast size.
yeah.
I I obviously I am here and I am not a producer, I'm a production manager, but I use this script in every single one of my stage management classes. And and as I was searching for what show I wanted to explore in stage management class, this was the one. I wanted to have something that was easily digested but has complicated facets. It may be easily digested, but there's a small section where we're saying a very long string of scientific terminology that I can't tell you necessarily what it all means because I'm just the stage manager, but I, that is interspersed, and it's created and written in a way that makes it digestible. You don't feel silly because you don't know what the words mean. And those sections are also really musical and have this like Fibonacci-esque spiral to them. They just keep moving and moving and moving. And I think that that's really, really beautiful. And so for that reason, for the small cast, for the interesting props, for the musical aspects, for a beautiful, concise, non-problematic set of language that accepts everybody for who they are and doesn't call anybody out for any specific part of themselves that may be outside the norm or perceived as outside the norm. It's really a beautiful script. So every semester in my stage management class, that's what we study.
That's so cool. I feel like there's something about Gunderson that does remind me a little bit of Kimberly Bellflower insofar as the rhythm is concerned and the sort of momentum is concerned. I feel like they have a similar skill in terms of winding something up and then letting it go. And I know that that's both a real joy and also a challenge for directing, right? And certainly for stage management. That I would think that would also be part of the appeal for teaching this script to stage managers, would be that it has to have a kind of rhythm to it. And I wonder, Michelle, if you wanted to just give us a little insight into what kind of things are you doing as director to kind of help let that happen?
Oh, wow. That's been one of my favorite parts of this whole process. I am a director who takes several days for table reads, especially for something like this. I direct a lot of musicals, so I have that musical side of things, but it is finding the music in this language. And Gunderson is so, so, so specific. Her use of italics, ellipses. If you read her notes that she gives on every production, and she's got 12 points that she gives, the first thing is, you barrel through, you work like pace is the thing. And she tells you when you slam into the pivot. And so we spent a lot of time on the language, the etymology of the words from that dramaturgical side that we've talked about, getting them into the meaning under the meaning of it, finding where they have to ground their voice in more authority, in more of their personhood. and maybe not lean into the romanticism of it, but to find the grit that's in the grace of the words. So we took a full week with that. And we've done things where it's been me kind of conducting them back and forth to really move it. And then I have to say, we did intimacy direction outside where they weren't touching each other, but I laid them down in the grass looking up at the clouds, saying, just talking about the clouds. And I said, go into the scene. And then all of a sudden it's grounded in the wonder and having them breathe with one another. And that one on their backs on the ground, I had them touching the tops of their heads to one another. This is for Henrietta and Peter, so that they could, in a very safe way, feel the breath between one another and that movement of energy, literally up and down their spines and across the tops of their heads. And it was so amazing to watch these two young actors drop into their breath and the language and the fun, because there's playfulness in this. There's a real playful banter that happens and the rhythm of it, so that when we got them back up on their feet, they had that going through them. And then adding in, real life scientist, Dr. Alison Kirkpatrick from our physics and astronomy department to come in and talk about the sexism she still faces. And that dropped them into another phase of reality, that what they're talking about is an ancient history.
Right.
It's right now. So.
Yeah, that's one thing I really hope that our audience will have a chance to see in the lobby. We've got one of the members of the dramaturgical team, as you know, working on a poster to kind of help, yes, uplift the women in science who have been overlooked, but also to draw our attention to current censorship that's happening, ways that information that has been readily available and highlighted by our government is no longer available, because it basically put a spotlight on something that is considered a part of DEI, right? Is considered diversity, to look at women and the role that they had. And yet, I mean, truly, we would not be where we are right now. And this was literally not that long ago. It was basically about a century ago that we learned that we were just one part of a much bigger galaxy, I don't know, universe, multiverse, I don't know. There's stuff out there and we're little.
Yeah, I think that that's part of it. There would be no Hubble telescope. There would be no James Webb telescope. Henrietta literally made us understand where we landed on the map at a cosmic scale. She endeavored to answer the question, where are we? And I say,
so huge.
Tells us, why are we? But where are we in the universe? And I just think it's just the most incredible thing to explore every single night. There is not a moment that I wish I were anywhere else than in my rehearsals.
What a gift. What a gift. There's something really so powerful also, and I know we've sort of touched on this, but I think it's thematic as much as it is practical, which is the small cast, but the big ideas. And something about having that scale that's happening on stage as well as in the ideas of the play is genius. And I'm just thinking of some other examples, but I think we can see that happening in other Gunderson plays, that she has a real skill set of being able to kind of take that bird's eye view and match some of the actual theatricality that's happening or could happen on stage with the ideas that are being evoked.
Yeah, she's super specific. I mean, we have, without giving anything away, we're in an observatory. We're on an ocean liner. We are in the universe. It's a massive scale, with a lot of switches and things. It's very exciting, and especially using a revolve to have to move into it and to time it out. It broke my brain a little bit blocking it one night. That it is I was up there and I was like, I don't even know which way I'm going right now, clockwise, counterclockwise. But there is something to that level of specificity, that gives a director parameters within which to play, which means we have to find ingenuity in other ways. And I actually really appreciate that, because in order to really serve the piece, I have to lean into those directives.
It's so funny you mentioned that, though, because isn't that exactly how Henrietta made her discovery, right?
100.
I mean, I go back to the fact that, it's because of the limitations, it's because of the way that she was forced to make sense of things that she had the revelations that she did. Not to suggest that it didn't have to do with her brilliance, but rather that her brilliance was sort of put into a position where it could flourish.
Well, and the computers were hired to do the math of the people who were going to put their names on the papers that were built on the math of these women who were unsung. There is a line that says she knows she's only getting the corner of a chance. None of the work that they did was for glory. It was purely process driven, and I think that is something that I really appreciate in the whole thing of it. And that they say the mind is sexless, and so is the sky, but they were not allowed to use a telescope. Everything was from stagnant, static images, and they had to find the rhythm there.
Mm.
It's wild. I know Jenna appreciates this part of the story too, just with the star spanking and all the things.
Yeah, one of the fun things about producing the show is that there are so many specific scientific tools that were being used. Something called a star plate, which basically looked like a whole bunch of dots on a piece of glass that was a photo of the sky. And what they do is compare the star plates with, they called it a star spanker. It kind of looks like a fly swatter. You can actually see a real one on the Harvard website. There's a whole bunch of research and images of the equipment that they used. And they would have to figure out the math using a fly swatter and a glass plate. and, and so there's hundreds of these glass plates just hanging around that they're trying to make sense of, and that they're filling in their male colleagues so that they can do their work.
What was it about the telescopes that made them so dangerous for women to handle?
In order to view through them properly, you had to be there at night. I mean, that's one of the most, like, a woman being alone at night at the turn of the 20th century was unseemly. Also, they joke, they've called it the hypersex telescope.
This is
Right.
the thing.
Yeah.
It just reminds me, we're studying the Bacchae in history class, right? And it reminds me of the Thesaurus, right? Like the staff with the ivy that the Maenads would carry, right? And it's, of course, extremely sexualized because, hello, Dionysus. But also because we're talking about a play that's very specifically about what is it that these women do that nobody knows anything about. Let's imagine what it is that they do off in the woods when they're worshiping Dionysus. And I know that sounds like a complete far reach, but it kind of isn't, in part because I think, again, when we sort of go back to that first piece that I was talking about in terms of disability, in terms of the fact that Henrietta is deaf, and yet that's not, as I understand it, in the 19th century, for example, there were what they called ugly laws, right? That made it such that anybody who had any kind of disfigurement, however you want to call that, could basically be arrested for just being in public, being seen in public with their disability, right? And so to your point about, like, why couldn't a woman use a telescope? Because it's at night and that's already, like, scary. But in addition, she had this sort of piece of it that was, not a discrete, but rather large hearing aid that would mark her as someone who could be taken off the street for that.
Right. Or vulnerable, right? People being targeted for being vulnerable. We know that that's not something that has been eradicated as an issue. And the idea that a woman is not the agent of her own virtue. that her virtue could be somehow corrupted if she is alone at night in the study of the stars. So the fact that they had to be so ingenious with these little plates, they're 8 by 10 plates, they're very small. And we actually, as Jane knows, through the physics and astronomy department, we are going to be able to view and hopefully display antique star plates to show what it was. I mean, it looks like pepper just strewn onto a screen, and to make heads or tails of it, but much less find nebulae, novae, and to also find patterns, it's really confounding. And I think that that's the thing that I love so much about this play, is that it intertwines the pursuit of wonder, because music is the pursuit of wonder, art is the pursuit of wonder, science is the pursuit of wonder and something beyond ourselves. And I think that that's the thing that, I mean, I'm 5 weeks into just the rehearsal process and 8 months into the process of the show, and there's no part of me that isn't like jazzed and ignited by it, because of all of the things that it interconnects.
This is my 5th semester teaching this play. I stage manage the show and now production manager and mentoring the stage managers on this show. Can we do it again next semester?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a gift. Yeah. Because let's be real, that's not always true with all plays. I mean, we can say that. We can say that out loud.
Lord.
There's certain plays where you just are like, yep, and now that's done. And now I get to have a life. But this play, it feels like, again, just sort of comes into your mind, your body, the sort of imagination, and becomes part of all those who are lucky enough to be part of it.
Agree. I think that it has me pursuing questions of my own even more deeply than I did before. And it kind of drives home something that I've thought about a lot through this process, was that the father of the Big Bang Theory was a Jesuit priest, Georges Lemaitre. And he said there's 2 paths to the truth, faith and science. I just happen to take both. And I really appreciate that we don't have to separate these into separate places. My, one side can feed into the other and can move it forward, because faith is something that's also talked about in this play. What is heaven for one, and what is heaven for another? Is it science and lights of combustion? Is it this overall being held in being by source or creator or God, however anybody wants to see it? So in 60 some odd pages, in a very tight and compact play that we clocked at 90 minutes the other night, just doing a quick designer run, that you have so much depth in a short amount of time, and so much to leave and digest as you go home.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot to be said about the intersection of faith or religion and science here. It has always been at the crux, always, of are we believing in what the science is telling us, or are we believing in what our faith is telling us? And can they meet? I think that this play does a really interesting job of juxtaposing that between Henrietta, who is, let's call her the oddball of the family. She goes and travels away. She's into science. She got an education. She's not married. She doesn't have kids. And we're juxtaposing this with her sister in the play, who plays piano for the church, who is yelling at her in the first scene to come to church, who's, there's a moment where Margaret says in a letter to Henrietta that her father sent a package in the mail for her, sent her a book in the mail. And Henrietta says, "Is it a Bible?" And Margie says, "If it was a Bible, I would have said he sent you a Bible." And so we're continuing this idea of, are we pushing faith towards science, science towards faith? Are they magnetically opposed? And how can and do they intersect with one another?
This makes me want to see it with like Galileo from Brecht, right? Like, wouldn't that be a cool juxtaposition?
Yeah, it's funny. I went back and reread like Copenhagen with this in mind, too, because they also couldn't really have been doing their work without her.
Right.
Jenna, what were you going to say?
I recently saw 2 summers ago at Berkeley Rep, there's a new Galileo musical that was being worked on. And so I was watching this Galileo musical. I was watching like fighting against religion and to bring science to the forefront and arguing that Earth is round and how that made them heretics and excommunicated them basically from their jobs, their lives, their families for having these scientific discoveries. And how far have we come in Henrietta's timeline from that?
Well, you know, I keep thinking of the metaphor of one step forward, two steps back, right? Because I think we see that certainly with the treatment of any kind of minoritarian group, right? Women, but especially women of color and any person of color or with disabilities, et cetera, et cetera. But right now we're in a situation where it's just such a fascinating time to be doing a piece like this, because these questions about faith and science are not old questions anymore. And certainly, you know, again, to reference the history class, teaching history, ancients to Renaissance, and I've told my students this, it's never felt so prescient, right? It feels like I'm not going to have any trouble talking to them about what were the Dark Ages.
Sure. The Dark Ages are always, with any society, is when knowledge and the written word go away. Like, that's it. If we're going back to Mayan, if we're going back to, it's always the decline in education and dialogue. It's the burning of the Great Library of Alexandria. And one of my degrees is in theology. And so there was a time when theologians and scientists were one and the same. We have Pascal, Descartes, Copernicus, Galileo. It was again the pursuit of wonder, the pursuit of something transcendent. And I think data can be transcendent. I use a lot of data in my work on with incorporating neuroscience and practices into my theater teaching. It isn't just all this thing that's in the ether. It's very grounded, and I think that we forget that, and that we really lose something in our humanity when we're not doing what we do in improv. Yes, and yes, and it can be this, and where it can be nuanced and textured and not just one thing on a very sparse binary. That would make life so intensely boring. It is in the mess in the middle and the grappling that makes it exciting, that makes the pursuit of the question for the questions themselves, knowing you may never get an answer.
Yeah, beautiful, really beautiful. So, and to that end, I think that's one of the things I can say as we close. If you want to think bigger as well, and you want to consider the ways that we know what we know about the stars, about the universe, please come see Silent Sky.
Yeah, October 3rd through 5th. And we have 4 shows running just that weekend. But please come visit us, partake, enter the dialogue. We will have so many things for you to see inside the theater and out.